other piece of breaking news that I want to get you up to date on, and it is from a former U.S. senator, a sort of revered former U.S. senator from the Republican Party named John Warner. John Warner is a Republican senator from Virginia, senator of longstanding, also former Secretary of the Navy. He's put out a statement tonight saying, in part, as a lifelong Republican and a retired member of the U.S. Senate who once served as a juror in a presidential impeachment trial, I'm mindful of the difficult responsibilities those currently serving now shoulder. I am strongly supportive of the efforts of my former Republican Senate colleagues who are considering that the Senate accept the introduction of additional evidence that they deem relevant. If witnesses are suppressed in this trial and a majority of Americans are left believing the trial was a sham, I can only imagine the lasting damage done to the Senate and to our fragile national consensus. The Senate embraces its legacy and delivers for the American people by avoiding that risk. I respectfully urge the Senate to be guided by the rules of evidence and follow our nation's judicial norms, precedents, and institutions to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law by welcoming relevant witnesses and documents as part of this impeachment trial. Again, that is former U.S. Senator John Warner of Virginia, Republican senator, and a figure who looms large in the Republican Party with that statement tonight. Joining us now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, also a member of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe. Senator Whitehouse, thank you so much for making time tonight. I know it's been a very long day.
Good to be with you, and great to hear about my colleague and friend John Warner's letter. That's important.
It's important and it's timely. I wonder if you think it will be influential or what things might be influential in terms of your Republican colleagues weighing this decision tonight.
No, I think the forces of influence are primarily fear of retribution by President Trump and by his team, fear of having the Republican base turned against them, and fear of Mitch McConnell and the donors behind him. Against that, I think that these guys are willing to jump out of the hot pan into the fire of public scrutiny of why it is that for the first time in history we're going to have a Senate impeachment trial with no witnesses.
What do you anticipate in terms of what else is going to happen in the trial? Obviously, we're waiting on news from individual senators about how they're going to vote on that witness question. Do you expect that there will be any other motions or any other, I guess not resolutions, but any other amendments to the resolution or any other things that the Senate will be voting on beyond the witness question?
We will see. The witness question, I think, is designed to close off further amendments, whether spontaneous efforts to push for other rulings will be ruled out of order or not is still an open question and requires the parliamentarian to rule. But it is very clear that the marching orders are to shut this thing down, have no witnesses, get out of here, and do it before the Super Bowl, under that longstanding constitutional rule for impeachments that it needs to be done by the Super Bowl.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.